Good evening, everyone. I'm Jen Kem from Cancer Bridges, and welcome to the second night of Happy Feet. We have a wonderful speaker for you tonight. It's Dr. Leah Flaherty. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and the clinical director of Empowered Relief Program at Allegheny Health Network. She specializes in pain psychology, utilizing evidence-based techniques to help patients manage chronic pain. Dr. Flaherty is also an accomplished researcher and speaker, frequently presenting on mind-body approaches to pain management and well-being. We're grateful to have you here tonight. I will hand the mic over to you, Dr. Flaherty.
Great. Thanks so much, Jen. Hey, everyone. Good evening. I'm happy to be here with you all. Like Jen said, I'm a clinical psychologist, but my specialty predominantly is in pain psychology. And so I originally was training in the VA and found myself talking to a lot of vets about their emotional pain, and then found this incredible link between our emotional pain and our physical pain. And the more we start to learn about it, and the more fMRI scans, all kinds of different imaging studies that exist in the literature at this point, we start to find that the link between emotional pain and physical pain is really there and is far more significant than we ever thought possible. So when we talk about living with cancer, surviving cancer, going through an incredibly difficult and very scary situation, we find that oftentimes the pain that our body is in also parallels the pain that our mind might be in as well in dealing with this. And so that's largely what I talk to folks about. So the way that I kind of couch this is in this feeling of overwhelm that so many of us experience. And so I think about this woman in this picture who's just trying to do a million things, right? And so with the knowledge that no matter what is happening in our lives, the expectations don't stop, right? So we might be struggling with an illness, we might be struggling with all these different doctor's appointments, and the people that are around us still need us. And there are still so many things that we do, that we want to do, that we might have to do, but it's really about how we want to be involved in our loved ones' lives. And so the way that I think about this is, when we are dealing with so much, we often don't feel like ourselves. And so sometimes we can be shorter or snappier with the people that we love. We might act differently than we like to act. We might not feel like ourselves. And that can be really frustrating and kind of concerning to us as well. And so I want to talk about why that might be the case, what's happening within our body when we experience those kinds of things, and what we can do about it is really the way that I think about things as a clinical psychologist is, all right, good, here's the information, got it. Now, what do we do about it? Because I want to get back to living more and doing better in my life. And so the way that we think about pain as pain psychologists is kind of different from how we think about pain in our medical system. And so the definition of pain is both a negative sensory and emotional experience. And so I think largely when we think about what's the definition of pain, we think about, well, it's the where, right? The ouch, what is hurting in my body? Where is it hurting? When we think about the second half of that definition, the emotional component of pain, pain doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? If we experience any kind of physical pain, we're also thinking the who, what, when, where, why is how I always think about it. Who is this going to impact? Who is my pain going to impact, right? All of the people in my life. How long am I going to experience this? When is this going to be over? Is it going to keep getting worse? Am I ever going to feel better? So all of these questions that really kind of can feel like our brain is full of all of these questions with regard to our pain. And it can feel like too much often. And so in our country today, chronic pain is the fastest growing health condition. So incidences of chronic pain are growing faster than incidences of diabetes, of hypertension, of depression. So when we think about why is this the case, why is chronic pain growing so fast in our country, and what can we do about it? I think a lot of the reason has to do with the fact that we largely treat that first half of the definition, right? We're really good in our country at treating the where. And we're not all that good at treating all the rest of it, the emotional component of what it's like to live with pain. And so that's what we're talking about. So how can we start to figure out, how do we treat the whole half, or excuse me, the whole definition rather than just the first half? And so a lot of that has to do with understanding the mind-body connection, understanding what's going on in our body when we experience pain, both negative emotional and physical pain, of course. So we think about the mind-body connection. How's this guy feeling? not great, right? So we think about that. We know he's not, we can have that overarching definition of bad, right? He's not feeling good. How about if we think about his whole body system? Is his heart beating fast or slow? His heart's probably beating pretty rapidly, right? How about his breath? Is he breathing or is he breathing that shallow, unsteady, kind of shaky breath? Probably the latter. His muscles are going to be very tense, right? His blood vessels are going to end up constricting so that he can spread that adrenaline and cortisol all through his body. And so in our country today, we don't tend to be chased by a lot of bears, right? I've never been chased by a bear, luckily. I hope none of you ever have been either. So when we think about these bears that we experience in our life, I think a lot of them have to be metaphorical bears, right? The metaphorical bears that mean whether it's living with a chronic illness or living with all the stress that we have around us in our day-to-day life. And so sometimes the bears that we are living with are more of our internal bears rather than the external bears that are chasing us. And so, because we're at the top of the food chain, ancestrally, our body knows we got to protect ourselves. When we start that feeling of stress, when we experience emotional or physical pain, that means we need to do something. We better move. We better get out of there. And our body responds to those metaphorical bears in the same way that it responds to those real bears, right? So, our body is going to send this biochemical cascade head to toe all throughout our body to help us get out of there, to help us move to safety. The point is, stress is adaptive, right? If our ancestors didn't know how to respond to stress, if we didn't have that fight or flight system, none of us would be here today, right? And so we know that we need stress. It's only when it becomes too much and when it becomes chronic, that's when it becomes something we want to treat. And so we can respect and appreciate our body is sending us messages, is sending us, if we notice that fast heart rate or that shallow breathing, we can ask ourselves, okay, what are my bears? What is my body telling me right now that I need to respond to? And so we can start thinking about it like that. And so I love talking about brain anatomy, and so I'll keep it pretty simple for us here today. But this is my favorite brain diagram. We have this like little, it's perfect right here. It's packed with us all the time. And so if we think about right here, my thumb right now is our amygdala or our hypothalamus, right? So that's right, this inside part of the brain, that's our midbrain. So every animal on Earth, well, predominantly, most animals, I'll say, have that amygdala and that hypothalamus, right? That's our fear center of the brain. Around it here is going to be our cerebral cortex. My fist is going to be, we'll call that for simplicity's sake, my cerebral cortex. The thinking, planning, judgment, all of the executive functionings, the really smart part of our brain, the part that has kept us at the top of the food chain, right? And we've got down here the brainstem going into our spinal cord. It's a pretty elegant diagram, I think. The issue is when our fear center, when our hypothalamus or our amygdala is running the show, what happens is we quite literally blow our top, right? And so that means all of the blood flow, all of our energy is running to that amygdala to try to keep us safe, right? What's going on? How do I fight or flee or get ready for attack? And so what that means is our cerebral cortex largely goes offline. So that means that it's pretty familiar to me when I'm feeling stressed, this kind of inability to plan, judge, think, be nice to people. So all of these things that go along with experiencing moments of extreme stress, that's what happens when we blow our top. And so what that means is if we're thinking about the doom and gloom, or if we're thinking about all of this kind of negative activation on our system, that just means that we have this opportunity to act differently. So if I know right now, if I can feel my heart start speeding up, if I can feel, for me, it's maybe getting a little flushed in my cheeks, if I can feel that kind of anger or fear rising, that means what do I do about it? There's my cerebral cortex has gone offline. How do I get that back? What can I do? How can I get my thinking, planning, judging, executive functionings back online? And that's something that we can all do. And so we do that by learning to tap the brake a little bit. So if we think about our autonomic nervous system, that's going to be kind of led by the hypothalamus here, is going to send all of this adrenaline and cortisol, all these inflammatory biochemicals throughout our body that get us to fight or flee, right? And so we think about our sympathetic nervous system is like the gas pedal of the body. That's that excitatory sending all those hormones all through our bloodstream. That's the go, go, go part, right? So that's oftentimes when we are living with chronic stress and we're living with an illness that has really taken over a lot of our lives, and we're living with pain that has taken over our lives, it's kind of like living with our lives to the pedal to the metal, right? So we've got that gas pedal going. We have all of that adrenaline and cortisol rushing through our body. So when we think about that's the sympathetic nervous system. Our parasympathetic nervous system is like the brake pedal of the body. And so what I often hear from folks living with chronic pain is that you live your life with the pedal to the metal and then try to slam on the brake at night and find that doesn't quite work. And so oftentimes insomnia is making it so it's really difficult for you to go to sleep at night, or maybe it's just difficult to feel that sensation of relaxation, whatever that might be. And so when we are living our lives with the pedal to the metal and then slam on the brake, we wouldn't drive our car like that. And yet often a lot of us live like that, right? And so what I want to start to talk about is how do we tap that brake instead of slamming on it, different ways throughout the day that we can think about. I can feel myself rising. I can feel my gas pedal going. What can I do right now for myself to tap the brake a little bit? How can I activate my parasympathetic nervous system to reduce the amount of cortisol and adrenaline rushing through my bloodstream? How do I slow that down? And so one of the best ways to do that is through something called diaphragmatic breathing. I spend so much time as a psychologist defending the breath, because I think psychologists end up telling people to take deep breaths all the time, which people don't love. But if I can explain myself for a moment, what we breathe involuntarily all day, right? Thank goodness, because if I had to think about every breath I took, I would just have to add that to the list of all of the things I have to do throughout the day, right? So luckily, our body is really good at automatically breathing all day. Thank goodness. However, we can control the rate of inhalation, the depth of inhalation. So when we do that, when we take these big, deep, beautiful belly breaths, what that does is it kind of throws a wrench in this automated system. So if we're responding to these bears, right, our hypothalamus and our amygdala is telling our body we're under attack. We need to be worried. We're going to send cortisol and adrenaline. Go, go, go. This is happening right now. If I learn to tap that brake through that diaphragmatic breathing, if I can take a 10 minutes, big breath there, what I can start to do is, hey, Wanda, you're unmuted for a sec.
I mean, oh my God, it's all I got to ask. Oh my
That's
God.
okay. It's our diaphragmatic breathing. And so the way that we do that is we can the way that we can generally do it most easily is to put your hands, if you wouldn't mind doing it, right on your belly, right below your belly button, and just start to notice as you're breathing in and out, is that hand moving at all? If you put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly, is your chest hand going in and out? Is your belly hand going in and out? How can we start to focus on bringing that breath all the way down to our bellies? Imagining with every deep breath, imagining that air going down into our bellies. It's like inflating a balloon. Every time we breathe in, inflating that balloon, and out, deflating it. And so as we start to change our rate of inhalation, we start to change the way that we're breathing, what happens is it confuses our body. So if I think I'm being chased by something, and then I start having this big, deep belly breath, it's like throwing a wrench in an automated system. It makes my brain say, wait a second, I thought I was in danger. Why am I breathing like this? Something is different. Something has shifted. Maybe I don't need to be as worried as I am, right? And so what we're doing is we're starting with this automated system and we're applying human interference to this automated system. And so again, luckily our breath does the trick. You know, after 99.9% of the day, we don't have to think about breathing. But this is one opportunity that we have when we start with the breath. What it does is it activates our parasympathetic nervous system. So it changes everything from, we know that our heart rate will slow alongside our breath. We know that it starts to inhibit the release of cortisol and adrenaline. So it's not just that breathing stuff. What it does is it changes from head to toe the way that our system is working. So importantly, the gas pedal isn't the bad guy and the brake pedal isn't the good guy, right? We need both of them to drive. We need both our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system to survive. It's only when we notice ourselves living our lives with that pedal to the metal that we can have these opportunities to bring our system down, to kind of come back to baseline a little bit. And that's what we're talking about here, and reminding ourselves of our own power to do that, which is so important. And so when we do that, it's like we get our brain back online. So as we start to practice that diaphragmatic breath, as we start to get our system back, it's like we get our brain back online. Think about how much smarter we feel when we're not so stressed about things, how much kinder we can be when we're not in a state of stress, right? So it's like we get ourselves back. We can feel like us again. And so the way that I think about this is through this quote, which is, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And so I think about, and so that's by Viktor Frankl, who's a concentration camp survivor. And he talks about his entire form of therapy that he created was about finding power when we feel powerless. And so it's all about growth and freedom, and understanding that even when we think we don't have control, there may be something we can have control over, and finding those small opportunities of growth. And so the way I think about this quote is kind of this summarized. And so if we know ourselves, if we know how we act when we're under stress, and I hope all of you act lovely when you're incredibly stressed, right? You're all totally cool and calm and under control. Myself, maybe not so much. But we know that when there is a stimulus, we're going to have a response, right? And so maybe this is an opportunity if someone cuts you off in traffic, or if someone at work doesn't clean up after themselves, or if your daughter-in-law asks you to babysit your grandchildren for the 75th time and doesn't say thank you, whatever that stimulus and response is, we know what our natural response is. And so what I'm asking you to think with that quote is, do I have an opportunity here to choose a different response? And so if I know that when I can do that breath work, when I can take that beautiful, big, deep belly breath, I can think, all right, here's how I want to respond. Here's my automatic response, stimulus response, go. But what if I can grow my mind in that moment? What if I can literally get my brain back online? Are there other responses that I might have? Is there something that I can think about the way that I respond in a way that might be more impactful, that might go a different way, that might be unexpected, or might lead me towards a better path? And so by slowing down, what I'm asking you is to start thinking about what we're thinking about. And so as a psychologist, that's what I spend a lot of time asking people, right? What are you thinking about? Thinking about what you're thinking about. And that's not always that clear to us. And so sometimes it's so busy in our brains that to have some degree of quiet, to be able to bring it down just a little bit. What am I telling myself about this situation? Why am I responding this way? What's going on with me? Leading towards it with curiosity. What's going on is the way that I'm asking us all to think about this. And so in our brain, we think there's something called cognitive behavioral therapy. That's a really well-validated, really evidence-based form of therapy that a lot of us use. And so within cognitive behavioral therapy, we're always thinking about the relationship between our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors, right? And so importantly here, they're bidirectional, meaning our thoughts impact our behaviors impact our thoughts. So it's all this jumbled up relationship here between our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So for example, let's say I am about to parallel park my car, and I have the thought pop into my head, you're no good at this, you're going to mess up, you're going to cut too early. What happens to my feelings? Well, what happens to my feelings is I might start feeling nervous. And then in my behaviors, I might turn the wheel too soon. I might shift the way that I'm doing things, and then I can tell myself, see, I knew you weren't any good at this, and we can go back into this wheel. And so any means on this is where we can jump in to think about the way that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors all interact. And so that's kind of a silly example, but what I hear most often from the people I work with is something like this. And so if the situation is, because of my pain, I can't play with my kids or my nieces or my grandkids because of my pain won't let me do this today. And so if that's the case, if that's the situation, what kind of thoughts might we have? Well, we might think I'm useless, right? That's what I hear really often from people. I'm useless. I'm a bad mom, aunt, grandma, whatever it is, this really big, really nasty thought that we tell ourselves. And then what kind of feelings do we have? If I'm walking around telling myself that I'm useless, I'm a bad mom, my feelings, okay, bad. That's pretty simplistic. But so we can all think for ourselves, what definition of bad? And if anyone wants to type it out, or feel free to share whatever you want to say. But bad could be angry, sad, frustrated, upset, depressed, right? Whatever version of bad it is to you, that you're feeling useless or like a bad mom, aunt, or grandma. And so when we're telling ourselves this, and when we're feeling really bad about it, what kind of behaviors do we engage in? Well, we might snap at people. We might not engage. We might just kind of avoid the situation in general. I could isolate, right? Lock myself in my room, or spend all my time under the covers. And so if that's the case, then that goes back to the thought, I'm useless, or I'm a bad mom, aunt, or grandma, whatever it is for you. And so realizing here that this cycle will continue until we stop it, right? And recognizing our power here, we have more power to stop this than we kind of give ourselves. Yeah, and Nicole, that's a really common thing to do, because if we're changing kind of the way that we're able to interact, if our energy level has changed, if our ability level has changed, then we oftentimes see that that's what happens with folks. If we don't feel like ourselves, it's a scary concept, right? If I don't feel like me, then maybe I will avoid, or maybe I will isolate, because I don't know how to act if I'm not me, right? And so if we find ourselves doing this, we can recognize this cycle will continue until I make a move, right? This cycle, this is set at this point. This cycle will continue until we make a decision here to change it. We're fanning the flames of this. And I really want to make sure that I'm saying here that this is an automated process. This happens automatically. Nobody asked for this. You're not doing this on purpose. This is something that your brain will start to create these thoughts because of the confusion of your body feeling different, and your brain feeling scared, and your amygdala running the show, right? So all of this is happening until we make the opportunities for ourselves to change it. And that is not easy to do. And so I want to make sure that I'm not making anyone feel blamed or shamed here, because this is something that happens naturally, and it's something that we have the power to be able to change. And so how do we do that? Well, so in each of those triangles, if we've got 3 of those points on the triangles, that means that we can enter these in any place. And so one of the most common ways to enter it, to kind of jump into making changes here in this triangle, is through our thoughts. And so this is all through this process of thinking about what we're thinking about. And so remembering that these thoughts are automatic. And what happens here is the pain feeds into them. And so if we're experiencing pain, maybe it's neuropathy post chemo, or maybe it's, after a surgery, when we start to have that feeling, we can experience magnification. When we experience a pain signal, if I feel pain in my body, and I've had a scary experience in the past, I might go to this feeling of this rumination. So rumination meaning I can't stop thinking about it. It's like a broken record. I have people explain it to me like, it's like I can't get my brain off the pain channel. It's like my remote's stuck, it's broken. And so that's what we call rumination. And then we have the magnification. Those thoughts are, okay, so if this hurts now, this means that something's wrong. This means that my PET scan's not going to come back okay. This means that I'm going to have to live. And so all of these questions, this magnification that starts coming in, and then that leads us into the helpless feeling as well. And so all of that boils into what we call this negative pain mindset. And so all of these things, which feel very automatic because they are, until we start to look at them. And what I ask people to do most often is that thought telling the whole story, right? So am I telling myself the whole story with that thought? That thought that's in there that I don't have to believe, right? So I have the power to start challenging these thoughts. It's just about knowing how to do it. And that's something that we can do together. And so just because you think it doesn't mean it's true. I can think right now that all elephants are hot pink. That's not true, but somehow my brain lets me think that, right? Our brains are incredible. They are really creative and they can do bonkers things. And yet, if I tell myself, you're useless, you're always going to feel like crap and you're useless, that is a really powerful, painful thing that my brain is telling me right now that I can choose not to believe. And I'm not saying that's easy, but it is something that we can do together through learning how to start to combat some of those thoughts. And so taking down some of those feelings of helplessness and magnification, and we can do that. And so what we're talking about here is when we have that pain and we have what's called a catastrophic interpretation. So really a fear-based interpretation that it's that helplessness, rumination, and magnification. And so that's so overwhelming that it leads to distress, which then actually elevates our pain levels. There's been 30 years of research at this point on this unhelpful pain mindset that's found that folks who get stuck in this pattern of thinking, they have worse treatment outcomes than people who are able to get out of that pattern of negative thinking. And we can do that together. You don't have to be stuck in it. And so one of the ways that we do this is through what we call catching ants, ants being automatic negative thoughts. And so the reason I have these glasses up here is because I think about it as I'm not telling anyone here to put on their rosy colored glasses, right? So sometimes some of the stuff they're going through really stinks. I'm going to be the first one to say, yes, you're absolutely right. Some of this stuff stinks. So we're not rainbows and unicorns or denying pain exists, but rather we're saying, okay, here's my glasses. Is it possible that my glasses are a little dirty? Is it possible that I could clean them off a little bit to see things a little bit more clearly? And so that's what I'm asking you here. Is it possible that we can clean off our glasses a little bit to see the whole story and to see if there's more going on than what my brain has told me? And so how do we do that? And so let's say I have the thought, when my pain's bad, I can't do anything. And so that feeling is awful. And so if I tell myself, we start to creatively come up with some alternate thoughts. Even when my pain is bad, there are some things I can do. Okay, what are those some things? Do I believe you, Leah? Do I think you're full of it? Is this curiosity? So is it possible that there are some things that I can do? Yeah, I think that's probably true, that even when your pain is bad. And so this isn't me saying, when my pain is bad, I can do anything. No, that's not true. But there's probably something that you can do. So if we can look at another one. When I move, it hurts, so I better not move. Well, many of us have been through PT programs with physical therapy, with occupational therapy, with the knowledge that hurt doesn't equal harm, right? So oftentimes, if our doctor is telling us, you can go through an exercise program post-surgically, you can go through an exercise program. When we have neuropathy, being able to move it, there are parts of our bodies that we can work through. And so with that recognition that hurt does not equal harm, maybe that feeling of helplessness starts to turn into hope. And so we can start to build through this. We can make our body stronger so that we can go through this. And so you all learned that with your exercise program that you were talking about last week, it sounds like. When we have the thought, I feel useless, so I am useless. It's a really tough one, especially when for a lot of us, our lives have really changed, right? There have been significant life-altering changes in our lives. And so that can lead us to have these kinds of thoughts, like I feel useless, so I am useless. And so the feeling, of course, that goes along with that is some kind of miserable, some kind of bad. But if I have the alternate thought, I'm not telling myself the whole story here. I have been through so much. I didn't know that I'd be able to be here today. I didn't know that I'd ever walk again, talk again, be able to hold my grandkids again, be with my family. So maybe I'm not telling myself the whole story. And so if I have that thought, maybe the feeling is not wonderful, lovely. Maybe the feeling is interested. Maybe there's something compelling about this, right? So just asking myself, what is the whole story if that's not it? And so this is all about creativity. And there's some really cool research that shows that when we start to practice these alternate thoughts, it's literally growing the brain. And so we get stuck in these patterns of negative thought. There's actual atrophy in parts of the brain for decision making and pain control because we get so stuck. But when we start to practice catching these ants and creating alternate thoughts, we can start to grow neural networks within our brain. And so the actual structure and the function of the brain changes when we create these different thoughts. It's really fascinating and very empowering. Okay, so we have some of these different thoughts that we have. And so there's all these different examples, and I can send those along with Jen also, just kind of these ideas that these are some of the thoughts I have and how do I start to combat them. And so it can be really hard to combat these thoughts, which is why it's great to write them down or to talk to them with people who have been through similar things and say, hey, I'm really stuck on this thought that I can only be happy if I'm pain-free. How can I start to shift that around? And do you have any suggestions? And you can work on friends or family with those. Okay, so that's kind of our first entry point. And so that's jumping in on those thoughts, challenging those automatic negative thoughts, cleaning off your glasses a little bit. Is there anything I could be doing differently? And so the next way that we jump in on this triangle is through our behaviors. I really don't like the phrase fake it till you make it because I think it's so tough, but there's so much research that shows that if we wait around to feel better and then we're going to do stuff, it doesn't really work. And so oftentimes, even when we don't feel like doing something, that's the best time for us to start to make those changes. And so if we wait, so when I feel better, I'm going to start walking again. When I feel better, I'm going to start visiting my family again. When I feel better, that's when I'm going to start to listen to music again. So if we keep waiting for those things, they generally don't come. And that part's really hard. So that's when we start to force ourselves to say, okay, even though I don't feel like it, maybe I'm going to put my favorite song on today. Even if I don't feel like it, how many sunny days do we have left in Pittsburgh? We better get out of this house and get the sun on our face, right? So some of these things, I better get out of here. And so we talk about this as the fear avoidance model, with the recognition that what happens when we experience pain, and so this is kind of a mess, I'll move this slide. A lot of it has to do with what we call kinesiophobia, which is fear of movement. And so when we get stuck in this cycle of fear of movement, we generally find ourselves pretty stagnant. And so that's when we got to shake it up a little bit. And a lot of that has to do with our values. And so what I mean by that is if I followed you around all day, so let's think about, tomorrow or today, whatever. If I followed you around all day, would I know what's important to you? That's a tough question. And sometimes we have days where we don't live in accordance to our values, right? And so if maybe you were able to get to church today, maybe you were able to get to be with your family today. I got to go to the Pirates game with my kids, so that's a value of mine, right? Being outside with them. And so with the knowledge that sometimes we are able to do these things, and we call those toward days. Some days we are moving towards our values. And so I have this compass up here, because if we think about the things that are important to us, values of relationships, of health, of education, of learning, of compassion, of nurturing, whatever your values are, your kind of our internal compass, the direction that we want to live our lives in, faith, whatever it is, knowing that we're never going to get to north, right? We can keep traveling north. I can keep traveling to being a good mom, and yet I will never arrive at best mom ever, right? Even though maybe I have a mug that says that. We can keep moving in that direction. And so every day we get to make those choices. And some days it's going to be too hard, right? Some days I'm not going to be able to move in that direction. Maybe there's another value that I can live in accordance to. So if I'm not going to be able to physically get out there, and I'm not going to be able to live one of my values being exercise, right? Or being out in nature. Maybe some days that's just not going to work for me because my body's not letting me. So what's another thing that's important to me? Music, relationships. Can I move in that direction? And so just thinking about the small ways that we can do that, the small ways that we can move towards our values, and giving ourselves the freedom and the opportunity to know that some days it's not going to be okay, and that we can say, maybe I can try this tomorrow. And here's a really small thing that I can do. And so we talk about SMART goals being specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. So if I'm telling myself, let's say that education is something that's really important to me, educating others. And so how can I make that specific? How do I look at that goal and creatively make that more specific? Am I able to talk to a group of people that are really important to me, that I can tell this information to, that's also really important, right? So I can make that specific, measurable. Yes, I'll be here at 7 p.m. tonight, right? Is that attainable? Yeah, we can make that work. Is it relevant? Of course it is, because I love pain psychology and I love being able to share this information with people. And is it time-based? Yes, absolutely. So we can start thinking about these big goals that we might have. Like, I'm going to start exercising again. Okay, what's that going to look like? Is it going to be 5 minutes a day? Am I going to be able to do that 10 minutes a day? And so starting to work with ourselves with the recognition that if we're looking up this big old staircase of this giant goal that I have, how do I think about each step on it? And how can I be kind to myself and compassionate to myself that maybe some of the goals that I've made are too big? And how can I be more compassionate and give myself the grace of trust in the beginning that I'll get there? It's just going to take some time. And the last way that we start to enter into this triangle is through our feelings. And so how do we do that? So we talked about challenging our automatic thoughts. We talked about thinking about the values in our life and kind of moving towards them in small, meaningful ways. And then our feelings. How do we shift those feelings to make ourselves kind of less lizard-like? How do I get my brain back in that way? And so one of my favorite ways to do this is through something called progressive muscle relaxation. Um, so progressive muscle relaxation is a process of wringing out the muscles in your body. And so oftentimes when I ask folks to work on diaphragmatic breathing, when I was at the VA, I would get in trouble with people saying, oh, you're asking me to do that breathing stuff again. So this to me is kind of goal-oriented, goal-based, and so we can do this together. So if you're all open to doing this with me, we can do a quick exercise on it. So just at this point, I know it's kind of wacky to be talking to folks about chronic pain and then asking you to get as comfortable as you can, but that's what I'm doing. So get into a position that makes your body feel okay. Usually that means uncrossing your legs or arms and just kind of letting your body settle down. And what we're going to do is this progressive tensing and releasing of our muscle groups. And so importantly, if there's a part of your body that's in a lot of pain right now, and I ask you to clench it, don't do that. Just move on to a different part of your body. If I'm asking you to do something that's going to bring you pain, you can skip that part and come back with us when we're on the next body part. So at this point, I'm going to ask you to take a deep breath. And when you breathe in, curl your toes in. Really curl those toes in. Fold them. Feel the tension in your toes building. Hold that, feel that power and strength, and release. Feel them kind of tingling a little bit. Feel what it's like to not hold that tension there. And let your body settle in. What we're going to do now is ask you to point your toes. And so when you point your toe, you'll make that muscle in your calf. And so when you take your next deep breath, point your toe and build that muscle in your leg. Hold it. Keep pointing your toes. Point them like this. Hold that tension. Feel that strength. And release. And so when you release, feel what it's like to not hold that tension. Feel it come to neutral. Maybe it's a little tingly. And just let yourself feel what that's like. What I'd like you to do now is kind of put your knees together and build that tension in your thighs. And so when we're going to take a breath and feel yourself making a muscle in your thighs, holding it. Hold that muscle, building that heat. Hold it and release. And let it go. Next one we're going to do is our biceps. We're going to come up here and make our big old Popeye muscles. So when you take a breath in, I want you to hold your biceps. Hold them strong. Feel those muscles build. Feel that heat coming into your arms, holding it. Hold and release. Kind of feel what it's like to not have to hold that anymore. Experience the relief of just letting it go. And next one we're going to do is our shoulders. You take a deep breath. Put your shoulders up as high as you can. Really try to touch your ears with your shoulders. Hold it. Hold those shoulders up, 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 up. Feel that tension building. Hold it. And release. Imagine you have weights on your shoulders, letting them come down. Whew. Feeling what it's like to not have to hold that anymore. And then the last one we're going to do is I'm going to ask you to take a breath and hold your fists like this. So take a big, deep breath and feel that tension in your fists. Hold it. Feel the heat rising. Feel it building in your fists. Hold it. Hold it. And release. Now look at your fingers. See them changing colors a little bit. Feel what it's like to not have to hold that anymore. And just let it go. So there are so many different progressive muscle relaxation videos available on YouTube, on different apps. And so they'll do all muscle body groups, so your whole body. And so I'll have folks say that they do it before they go to bed and that they fall asleep before they get to their thighs, right? And so you can just let yourself hold it, release it. And kind of, I think so often we don't know that we're holding that tension. We don't even understand how much we're holding because of the overwhelming stress that a lot of us are living in. And so when you kind of are holding that in your body all day, being able to kind of give yourself the permission to let it go can be really impactful and can change the way that your body is feeling. And so progressive muscle relaxation can be very impactful and very helpful for that. Okay, so what we've learned about today, we've learned about our ability, our power to change our responses, to recognize and to appreciate that given the inherent stress, all of the bears that we are all living with, that we're all dealing with on a day-to-day life, oftentimes we get stuck in patterns of reacting, right? Without even asking ourselves, what am I thinking about right now? How am I feeling about this? We find ourselves reacting before we're thinking about what we're doing. And so what that can do often is lead to more stress. And so now we know whether or not we want to change our responses, right? Maybe that stimulus and response is working for us. And if it is, well done, all of you. But maybe you're interested in changing some of those responses. And if that's the case, we can do that through challenging our thoughts. And so by curiously creating alternate thoughts and asking ourselves if we believe it and if it can help change the way that we're feeling about a given situation. We can also check in with our behaviors. Am I waiting to feel better before I start something? And if so, is there a small change I can make today rather than waiting to feel better? And then lastly, through both diaphragmatic breathing and through progressive muscle relaxation, allowing our mind and our body to be on the same page, kind of asking our bodies if we can experience relaxation, which then can open our mind up to being able to do it too. So using these different skills, we can change the way that we're reacting and responding in given situations. And so these are some resources. So I'm happy to stick around and answer some questions. But so at this point, so this is Empowered Relief is a free pain education class I teach that anyone can join in with us. And this Brain Over Pain is a YouTube channel that we have through AHN. And so those are a series of videos. There's a progressive muscle relaxation video there. There's just kind of understanding pain psychology is on this channel too. So I'd love to have you visit either of these or join us, whatever feels good for you. And so at this point, that's what I've got for content, but I'm happy to answer questions or to continue the talk.